Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Entrepreneurship to the Point. I hope that you're having a lovely Tuesday evening, and thank you so much for joining us today as we take some time to reflect on being 1 year and a little bit since the very first moment where we had lockdown, level 5. I'm so excited to be with a lot of most of the panelists that were there for our very first ETTP session, our remote session. And we were just reflecting on what all of us were going through at that time and the anxiety. So we're really looking forward to getting into some of what we spoke about in that webinar, and also looking forward to say what actually transpired over the last 12 months. And going forward, what should you as an entrepreneur really be thinking about doing? What are some of the lessons that we have learned, etc.? My name is Tebogo Marite, and I will be your host today. Joining me is Sean Tennyson, and he's going to be jumping on a little bit later and helping me with some Q&A and facilitating some of the conversation. Welcome to Entrepreneurship to the Point. Please do remember, if you're joining us for the first time, or maybe if you got your link as something sent through from a friend, do go to www.ettp.co.za and subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you are able to get information about all of our sessions on time. Sean, do you want to just jump on and say hi to everybody before I introduce the speakers that are with us tonight?
Yes, good evening, everybody, and welcome to, Tebogo said, the reflection of COVID over the past year. I think, if I think about this session a year ago, I was in the office, you were at home, so we're reversing roles here. But really also, it was just before the lockdown was going to come in. There was high levels of an anxiety. We're not sure what to expect. Remember, we needed to get out of the office just after the webinar so that we could make the curfew. And never having lived in a time where there was a curfew, there's definitely high levels of anxiety. But I think we've learned a lot, and today's panel is going to be able to reflect on that for businesses. But I think it's been, like you say, a tough time for small businesses, and the aim is really businesses this evening for you guys to engage, to ask your questions to the panel on the various topics that we're representing here this evening. Tebogo will give an overview around each person's expertise and speciality. And please also lean in terms of engaging the conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, I was just saying earlier on, Sean, I mean, that day, the anxiety was so high. I remember that evening, even my computer just, I got a black screen out of nowhere. So it was really, really a challenging time. And on your point about how difficult things have been for entrepreneurs, we know that, there's some research that has shown, about 26% of SMEs have been forced to close down their businesses. And there's so much that comes with that, because a business is a livelihood, it employs others. So if an SMME is closing down, it's such a ripple effect, and I think where we are now is in that what now kind of a phase, what is next kind of a phase. You can feel the spirit in the air and the energy. There's a lot of positivity, I think, in my opinion. A lot of SMEs are slowly getting back into that groove. They have done the pivoting, as we were talking about so much towards the end of last year. And now it's really about iterating in those new pockets of doing things. So I'm going to give a quick overview of everybody who's going to be on our panel today. And when I do call out your name, if you wouldn't mind just switching on your screen and saying hi, this is for the panelists. And then at the end of all of those introductions, we will then go into the one-on-one kind of reflections from each panelist, and then we can ask our question. So first, we have Mr. Phumlani Majozi. He's a business and macroeconomics analyst. So last year, he was really able to give us the perspective of where were we as an economy before all of this. And I remember him mentioning that we were actually already kind of in a recession. And so when this hit, it actually just catapulted that. So we really look forward, Phumlani, to you chatting to us about where we are now and what SMEs should think about going forward into the rest of this year and looking forward into the subsequent years. We also have Mrs. Nkateko Mbambo. She's a program manager at Property Point, and she's going to be talking to us about some of the elements around cash flow management. Last year, we were all scrambling and making sure, number one, if somebody owes us, please pay us. Number two, whatever we have in the bank, we're trying to hold on to it. So that cycle was a tight one, right? Nobody wanted their money to move around. So Nkateko is going to just talk to us again about what actually happened. How did SMEs do in terms of the cash flow element of their businesses? We then have Mr. Jonathan Cook on the line, and he's the chairman of the African Management Institute, if I'm correct. And he's going to be taking us through the leadership aspect, right? As an SME, you are, especially when things are tough, everything lands on your shoulders. I think that was the message that we had when advertising this session as well. It's all on you, especially when it's difficult. How do you go about that? How do you balance quantitatively what your business should be delivering and doing, and the qualitative stuff and the quality of life of your employees? How do you balance managing that as well? Because at the end of the day, we needed to keep everybody safe and we needed to keep everybody energized and able to work through everything that was happening. We also have Mr. Kagiso Mahura, who will be joining us, and he's an executive director at Gradage Mahura Investments. And he's going to be talking to us about, what were some of the advice that him and his team were giving to SMEs and to people in general about what should you do with your money. Maybe you've got some savings, maybe there's some investments or products that you already have. Should you cash things in? Shouldn't you? And I think the reflection there will really be what happened. What did people end up doing with their money? And now that things are slowly starting to pick up, what should we be doing from an investment perspective to make sure, number one, that we are future-proofed, right? We have now lived through this kind of a situation. What should we do to make sure that going forward, should anything similar come along, we are prepared as small business owners? We also have Mrs. Celeste Leroux. She is an entrepreneur herself, a dynamic woman, a multi-award-winning entrepreneur, and she's really going to be giving us the perspective of on the ground. She's running a business. She launched a new venture as well during the COVID period, but with all of the publicity and the awards that the Leroux, that Celeste and her husband have won, I don't doubt for a second that there was also challenges that they had to get through. So what was it like? What did she overcome? And what are some of the lessons that she can share with us? We then have Mr. Xavier Knox on the line. And from a psychological perspective, how's everybody doing? Mental wellness is something that has been more highlighted during this time because it's been difficult. And I think a lot of us have realized that it's not something we can leave at the door when we walk into our offices or when we sit in front of our computers, but it is who we are, and especially as entrepreneurs. So Xavier is going to be taking us through the mental and psychological aspect of where people are and how we can energize ourselves again to keep going forward. And lastly, we have Nomathemba Malinga. She's the director of Gravitas Communications. And Nomathemba is going to be giving us a perspective around branding, positioning, reputation management. Nomathemba and Property Point, actually, and Entrepreneurship to the Point, we work very closely together. They support us and assist us in terms of our public relations and brand building. And really, it's about, during this time, what did entrepreneurs do, maybe wrong or right? Noma, maybe you can also just give us some of those reflections, and what should we have done and what should we do going forward? Because I think when things are difficult, in terms of when people are making those choices of which SME, which business to get the service from, reputation has never been more important, because you don't want to make the wrong selection. You can't afford to do that. It's crisis time, right? So that is our panel for this evening. Can I get a quick screens on from our panelists so we can take a quick screenshot? And then I will allow everybody else to go off the screen and we will begin our program. Smiles. Thanks, guys. Thank you. I appreciate you playing along. So we're going to kick it off with Mr. Jonathan Cook, and we're going to be talking about leadership. Jonathan, I remember last year you categorized three kind of groupings of things. You spoke about head, hands, and heart. Hi, Kahisho, nice to see you. You spoke about head, hands, and heart. I'm going to give it over to you to tell us what happened. How did people lead during this time? What are some of the mistakes and what are some of the things that they did?
Thanks, Teboho. You've just frozen on my screen, so I hope other people can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good, okay. So I'll go on. It's some things change and some things stay the same. And one thing that stays the same is Teboho has problems with the computer. But gosh, it's been an interesting year, hasn't it? It really, really has. And the head, hands, and heart remain important, but in a different degree, I think. One of the things we did as AMI through last year was we ran a large number of seminars, webinars for SMEs. And one of the tools we found they really appreciated was scenario planning. So we had them look at an upside, what could go right, a downside if things really, the wheels fell off, and then a kind of expected line. And that was a useful tool for head, as well as the normal kind of cash flow stuff and all the stuff that we do need to look at. Under hands, I don't know about you, but I found that our staff rose to the occasion, because I said we have to stretch them, but we also have to trust them more if we're going to work remotely. And I think that trust has worked. People have been productive, they've been committed. On the whole, obviously, there might be exceptions. But I think trust is something that has grown in importance as we've had to work remotely and deal with really tough things ourselves. And then in heart, I suggested we should enlist our people in spreading happiness. And that is important. If you can get your staff working with you to really care, to listen, to create a culture of caring, that helps people cope with most remarkably difficult things from time to time. So I've got kind of 6 points that leaders need to do in SMEs through this time. And one is leaders think. The second one is the leaders keep going. Resilience has come out as a really important characteristic, particularly with entrepreneurs. We've seen some who have just fallen by the wayside and others who have got up, either maintained their businesses or started new ones, as we heard just now. So resilience is important. And the third thing is that leaders provide meaning. People can endure almost any difficulty if they can understand what's happening and have meaning. So I think providing meaning it's always important, but even more important during this pandemic. Another thing that links back to the first one about thinking and scenarios is that leaders anticipate. Now that's been more difficult than usual. Our whole planning kind of technology has gone out the window to a large extent because we just do not have the information. We do not have the information on which to plan. Of course, we have far more information now. It's still a bit of a mystery, but we're much better able to cope with what the future might hold now. And indeed, I think more businesses have survived than we anticipated. I'd be interested to hear more about the numbers that Teboho gave us. But I have a feeling between 60 and 80% of SMEs have survived across the continent. And there are various figures that are based on that vary quite considerably, so that might be wrong. We were very chuffed indeed in AMI. Of those who've been through our Survive to Thrive course, we had an 85% response rate to a survey, and 100% of those were still in business, which was very exciting. Some of them were reduced, and others had in fact grown. But that means only a maximum of 15% had fallen away. Now, that's a select group that we'd worked with them to help them to survive, but that's quite encouraging. The fifth thing is that leaders empower. I don't know about you again, but I find people have been productive, and that's certainly written about throughout the media, that contrary to what people expected, working at home has proven to be very productive. And so we are anticipating that at least some of that will continue. I don't know how much. It feels like a lot now, but I expect people will be pleased to go back to the office. But a lot of people are keen to continue working at home, and I think there has been something of a shift in that regard. So leaders empower people to work wherever they are. And that means training, it means affirming, and it means building self-confidence in being able to manage home and work and all those things. And then the final thing is that leaders listen, because if ever there's been a demand on us as business leaders in this past year, it's been in the mental health area. Obviously, Xavier will have more to say about this. I've been running for the African Management Institute a meditation series called Rise. It was daily when we began, when we needed to be helped to survive, and now we have a pre-recorded, streamed relaxation and meditation once a month, and an open discussion once a month on mental health issues. Really important. So leaders listen, because listening is the basis of mental health, and leaders are concerned about their followers, not just as productive units, but as people. And I've heard it written about, seen it written, and seen it, that leaders who take the time just to talk to people, not about the business every time, but sometimes just about life, find huge loyalty in those followers. So there were 6 things I thought. Sean, if you're taking it, it's leaders think, leaders keep going, leaders provide meaning, leaders anticipate, leaders empower, and leaders listen.
I think, Jonathan, I mean, once again, very, very tactical things that leaders are able to do and apply back into their business. Just want to maybe zoom in on one of the things, and that's really the resilience element, because I think what the year has really taught us now is to be resilient as leaders. And I think that, once again, when we speak on the psychological aspects of it, you know, has it been with the pressure that came with being resilient as a business leader during this time? Have you seen the bigger impact of that? Or do we believe that businesses have been able to effectively rise to the occasion? And we'll ask Celeste Leroux the question as well, as a business leader herself. You know, what toll has that taken on leaders?
I don't know. You know, there are surveys that have been done. I don't have any in front of me at the moment, and others may know, but my anecdotal sense is that people have been exhausted, really, really tired. And to combat that, people have been doing sensible things like exercise. You know, I mean, the 4 big things of resilience would be exercise, proper diet, good sleep, and then the non-physical things of meaning and relationships, and what's the other one? Xavier will probably know, but meaning is really, really, really important. That if we can see why we're doing something, we can survive. And I think the first few months, people were living on adrenaline, making plans as quickly as they could, and just kind of very busy. And that's very energizing, actually. Then around the kind of second half of last year, people just got tired and wanted to give up and run away. And now I think probably people are getting second wind, realizing this is going to be long term. I said last year that this thing could last as long as a year. We're now into at least another year. So I think we're now into it and going back to a more kind of level playing field.
Awesome. I think, once again, guys, some practical elements for leaders is really to think, keep going, provide meaning to your staff, anticipate scenario planning. What is the future holding for your business? Also being able to empower your staff. And I think with that empowerment comes just being able to equip effectively and also affirm what they're doing. But I think most importantly, like you said, Jonathan, to be able to listen to where staff members are at. So I think if we start looking at that, Nomathemba, we're going through to you now, and just saying that if that is what leaders needed to be able to put themselves in, when we look at organizations and just placing themselves in the marketplace from a kind of PR and a branding perspective, what have you seen as the biggest reflection during this year? on mute. A year later, Nomatemba, we should.
I can't believe I just made that mistake. Anyway, so much for Brilliant Basics, which was my first point for the message today, was to say that one of our experience that we found, and I think, Sean, we've had lots of conversations about this, about brilliant basics for basic communications for businesses and SMMEs. I think when we speak about strategic communications, people almost always jump to the media and the PR part of things. However, for small businesses, communications is just as easy as about building relationships and endearing trust and reputation. You know, I think we went into quite a lot of detail last year when we were getting into lockdown and said, the first brilliant basic is endearing trust and ensuring that you maintain the relationships, and then that you keep your promises. You do what you say you're going to do when you've promised you're going to do it. And when you can't do it because there's a challenge, communicating that. And I think that is such an important lesson I've seen through the last year in terms of communicating in a way that your client understands, and explaining to them if you are unable to get to a job or you are sick at that moment, that, you know, I'm facing certain problems, I can't get to your job. And I think for me, those are the brilliant basics before we get to branding, before we get to communications, because when you keep your promises, you endear confidence, you build trust, and then people are able to come back to you for repeat business. So for me, the brilliant basics of communication is communicating when you're having a problem, communicate when you're going to do your promises and meeting your deadlines in the way that you've promised your clients. So for me, those are the brilliant basics for the year. And so much has happened, and it's shown that the people that keep their promises are the people that are able to get repeat business.
Yeah, and I'm just reflecting back on the point that Jonathan made when he spoke about it last year around hands, hearts, and head, and very much on the hands part, he was speaking about the ability for people to start building trust. And I think once again, from a brand perspective, is that organizations needed to ensure that they build trust in the marketplace with their clients, because we saw that a lot of small businesses that have been able to effectively build that trust, specifically in supply chains, have been able to stand the test of time.
The test of time, yeah.
Great reflection. T, we've got you back. I'm going to hand over back to you again.
Okay, no, that's perfect. And then I just wanted to get beyond the brilliant basics of building trust and relationships. There's been so much going into the external communications and media space. COVID has leveled the playing ground, because the media space has really evolved. There was always an evolution of print media being very digitally based. A lot of the online publications have grown their reach and their audiences to about 80%, viewership, and some of the print publications are not so viable anymore. But that presented an opportunity for smaller businesses to tell their stories, to position themselves in the marketplace much better, because instead of needing always a Nomatemba to distribute your story, the publication was a bit more accessible for the average business on the ground to engage with the media. So that digital evolution of media, both locally and internationally, was quite an interesting phenomena. So much so that even as a communications practitioner, we've had to evolve the practice and the communication sciences of how we engage with media and what's important in getting our stories to the marketplace. I'm so glad that some of the stories, the SMEs are on the call today, because we've had an opportunity to work with React 24 with their beautiful stories and of success.
And something like that, their stories of resilience and success have made headlines and really gone international in their story. And before COVID, a smaller business like that story wouldn't necessarily make a headline, but that human story of resilience and winning and making through difficult times has really touched people's lives and created talkability and readability. And the number one lesson for me there is that how we then position our stories is that people want to hear human brands. People want to see and humanize your brands. And it's less about branding and braggy and more empathetic communications and human-based stories. Those are the stories that we pick up. We go online to News24, to MoneyWeb to be reading human stories and stories that lift your spirits. I think we all went through a difficult time. So really in positioning and how you position your brand, we're less braggy about I've made 50 million rand in this year, to much more, I've helped these many people, I've done this and this, human stories and telling a story of resilience and success, less about the money, but more about impact based. So my lesson on that, just to summarize, is that when you really position your brands going forward, talk about your story, talk about the difficult times, talk about what you did to go through the difficult times, and then talk about how you want to take the lessons to the future. So how you show up is being more human. I think it's much more acceptable these days to have struggled. It's much more acceptable to say, I was in hospital for 2 weeks, but then I managed to get up and my business is still good. People want to hear that. I found that those are the stories that people want to hear. So when we talk about brand positioning, less braggy, less hard selling, and more showing the humanness of your brand. And those are the things that are really very important for taking forward, Sean.
Awesome. I think very much linked to the empathy element that Jonathan also unpacked. We've got the chat facility as well. Please feel free to ask any questions to the panel, and we will also be taking some of the questions that's from the panel. But yeah, T, I think macroeconomic environment we're going to go into now, eh?
Yeah, thanks so much for holding down the fort, Sean. But I just want to quickly summarize, what Noma said. I think it also connects with the basics that you were speaking about. And I think the audience will also see if they go to our site, we're doing a back to basics series. I think it's back to basics in terms of operationally, but certainly back to basics in terms of our human elements as well, where no matter where you are, money, no money, whatever, we were all as susceptible to something really, really scary. And I think that is what has broken down those barriers to being transparent and to being a little bit more lenient and to really tapping into our human nature just a little bit more. So thank you so much for that, Noma. We're now going to go, we're going to chat to Phumlani. Like I said at the beginning, everything happened. It was probably the worst time economically that this could have happened because we were already having such a tough time. But what are things looking like now? Are you optimistic? Or are we still kind of now, it went from bad to perhaps worse, but is it one of those moments where now it's so difficult that the only way we can go is up? Where are we economically?
And I think maybe, Phumlani, before you start, I think just for our audience as well, what I appreciate with Phumlani is that he's going to give us the honest truth.
Amen.
So.
All right, thanks, Sean. Sean and I have known each other for some time now. I'm not sure, Sean, how long it has been, but it's been years. So it's been exciting to work with you guys, and it's good to be back. Hey, after a very tough year. The year was tough. the year was tough. Just to look back at, I'm just going to be brief on what sort of how things played out last year. So what happened is that we had the biggest contraction in 100 years, right? The contraction of the economy, that was 7%, right? It was the biggest dip in 100 years. We also saw the fundamentals on unemployment went up, right? Government debt continued to go up as well. So those things were not looking good. So, I mean, when you look at business confidence and all those things, so there was a sort of a massive impact on the economy. I remember there were two major points I made last time we spoke on the webinar. It was around the fact that one of the things that are being imposed by the pandemic is a shock in demand and supply, right? In the sense that you had people being withdrawn to houses, right? Being told the lockdown was about that. Stay in your house, don't move out, just go out if you're going to buy something or to get for an essential service or whatever. But really people couldn't, participate in the economy productively, right? So, I mean, as a result, there was no demand. Also, the supply as well, the production of goods. I know as goods are being supplied to the market, that was also impacted. So that's why we saw the contraction of this 7% that we saw last year, which was massive, and unemployment going up, right? And then also, I spoke about something that was very important to highlight, because at the time, the idea was that what we need to do, or what government was doing, was to try and firstly, they lowered the interest rates very, very low. They're at 3.5% right now, with the objective to encourage, money into the economy, for people to borrow and try to spend. So they lowered the rates, right? And also what government did was that they dished out 200 billion rands as a way to try and help distressed businesses, right? Businesses that were being affected by COVID-19. So that was put out there. That was the money that was supposed to be spent on the economy. And I said that when we last spoke, I wasn't too much optimistic about that. Reason being, because if you have a pandemic, like a virus where people still fear to go out, right? Even if you can dish out the money in the economy and say, here's the money is available, go and get it. But if people still fear the pandemic, they won't participate productively in the market or in the economy. So we've seen that when you look at the numbers on credit, on private loans, they are still very not good. Private sector loans, they're not good. In fact, it was the slowest growth in February, if I'm not mistaken, this year, in a decade or so, right? In other words, yes, rates are very low, and 200 billion rands has been sort of given to small businesses so they're able to bounce back, but still it isn't really working, right? People aren't going out there. And one of the concerns, of course, with businesses, that they fear to take more loans, to get into more liabilities as well, right? Because really there aren't really free loans. It's not like free money, really free, but it's at sort of adjusted, rates and all that, but it still needs to be repaid back. So business is still they still fear to go out there and take those loans because of the uncertainty in the environment. So, I mean, the fundamentals from that point of view, they don't look good at this point, right? So now we are in, as we are into 2021, the projections by IMF, World Bank, the Reserve Bank as well, they are saying it will be 3% economic growth, right? But remember, we need to, for me, as what I am looking for is how long will it take us to go back to the pre-COVID-19 levels, right? Which, by the way, they went good. They went, as Tebogo said earlier, that when I last spoke last time, I was saying we're already in a recession, and that was true. The first quarter of last year was negative 2%, growth, which was a contraction, right? So, but the question is, how long are we going to take for us? How long is it going to take for us to return back to the pre-COVID-19 levels? And the estimation, according to the Reserve Bank, is 2023, 2024. That's when we'll be able to sort of return to the pre-COVID-19 levels, which were not that good still, right? But at least we'll be in a position where really we've tried to sort of reverse damage that was done during the COVID-19 period. So we also saw that, as some of you may have, well, we all feel the increase in petrol price, as you saw recently, petrol price skyrocketing to record levels. So, and because of taxes that have gone up. So, I mean, all those things, they play a factor as well. Electricity as well is going up, which impacts the ordinary man in South Africa. I was reading somewhere in one article that economists, very influential economists in South Africa, they project that unemployment will continue to rise up until July this year, right? At least they say by July this year, unemployment will continue to rise. So all those dynamics, they sort of have a negative impact on them, on SMEs. And I've always said that we are at a point where right now, I like what Ramaphosa is doing with respect to sort of, reforming the energy industry. Gwede Mantashe, the Minister of Energy, is working on that in terms of bringing in the private sector producers into the grid. That's a good step because we already see the load sheddings as well. They are taking place right now as we speak, right? Every now and then, Eskom cuts down on power, right? And that impacts how we work at home and how businesses are operating. So you need to have those reforms on power supply by reforming the energy industry, as Ramaphosa is doing it, but it needs to be as speedy as possible, right? It needs to be done quite in a speedy manner. Also, I would like to see things like making sure that we give things like tax breaks to small businesses. These are SMEs we are engaging tonight. Tax breaks, making sure that they lower the regulations in terms of the process to conduct your business. The easier and less costly it is, the better for your organization. So I mean, that's the state of where we were last year, of how bad the numbers were. Where we are right now, we are recovering, yes, because we've sort of reopened the economy over the past quarters. But the numbers still, they don't look good, right? And one of the reasons is that they still, again, the fact that we are still limited on how we can operate. The vaccination process is being slow, and Ramaphosa's administration has sort of mismanaged that. We are very slow in terms of vaccinations. In fact, even countries like Zimbabwe, when you look at the vaccination rate, the rollout rate is much better than ours, right? So if we can get the vaccination process as quickly as possible, we get people vaccinated so they are confident to get back into the market, that will have a huge positive impact, in the country. And we will start then seeing sort of maybe that interest rate that's been lowered, making more and more positive impact, and people borrowing their money in businesses and spending it, trying to keep the economy productive. So that's my honest answer. As Sean was saying, I've tried to be honest. I'm a bit, I've been regarded as a pessimist, which I think is a sort of a fair description of me. But I'm always guided by how things are on the ground. So we have a lot of work to do for government, for the Treasury. I think for the Reserve Bank, there's nothing to do now, right? I think the rates where they are, they must keep them. And the next cycle, in fact, they're already saying they're not going to cut them further. The next cycle now will be to hike the rates. So that's where we are. And I don't want you to be despondent, but I just want you to continue to engage in the market, be productive, and just understand that we're in a tough situation and that the state or the government needs to push for more reforms. Yeah.
I think, it seems quite positive for me, actually, in terms of some of the elements that you put in. Maybe two things that I want to get your perspective on in your looking glass from a projection perspective. So just, when do we've heard numerous feedback around when the kind of growth cycles will start again. What do you foresee in the next 2-3 years? And then also just in line with that, specifically where the country's debt ratios are at, how does that also impact on the broader macroeconomy?
Yeah, I'll start with the debt. Well, the stabilization targets, they are saying that they want to be at plus minus 90% by 2025, 2026, right? So that's a target by the minister. But it's hard to buy that. I think because if you want to achieve those targets, then you will need to sort of push even more on structural reforms. And we all do know that when it comes to structural reforms, that's where the ANC is struggling. And the reason why it is struggling, it's because there are interest groups, right, that are pushing back against that. Let me give you a specific example. The public sector wage bill, right? Right now, there's a tussle, right, between the labor unions and government, right? The matter now has been pushed to the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court has said they will hear it in August, if I'm not mistaken. And already right now, the unions are saying they're not going to give up on that, right? So the fundamental question is, are we going to see the ANC sacrificing what is called the Tripartite Alliance, right? Which has been, they've been part of the Tripartite Alliance for some time now. In fact, the past 26 years of democracy in South Africa have revolved around, it's been the ANC, the Communist Party, and COSATU, the labor unions. So the reason we've always seen the ANC sort of, caving when it comes to what unions want, because unions tend to say, we're not going to vote for you if you don't increase the wages, right? COSATU has said that before, but they've come back and said, no, actually, we're going to support you, because they realize that without really for them being in their alliance, they won't be as powerful or be able to influence public policy. So the reason why there isn't much credibility on government that they will be able to meet those debt stabilization targets that they are aiming for is because we do know the internal politics of the ANC, that they will renege, right? They will sort of cave at some point. And as a result, the government still sort of increases that spending. That spending is in cut, right? SOEs remain a big issue. There are billions being spent there. The billions, the guarantees for Eskom, they are quite massive, right? If this reform of bringing in other independent power producers isn't taking, place as soon as possible, and we see sort of less, loan guarantees to Eskom over time, we have a problem, right? So the debt I don't buy that they will meet. They've always missed it anyway, Sean, over the past 10 years. When you look at their debt targets, they've always missed it all the time, right? They would say this, and then by the time they release the actual numbers, it's higher. So there is history to back that. And then you asked about how do I see from a growth point of view? I think the numbers of 3% that are being estimated by IMF, World Bank, the Reserve Bank as well, I think they are reasonable numbers, given the fact that, remember, this is a bounce back from a contraction, right? So in fact, it could be even be higher than that, than 3%. But remember, it's in comparison to last year, right, which was mainly a contraction, right? That's why I was saying earlier that I'm more interested in looking at when do we get back to the pre-COVID-19 levels, right? Which weren't good, but in the case of South Africa, they were the normality at the time. Yeah.
I think hopefully that answers also Trevor's question that he posed on YouTube. He was asking around what's the pessimistic view in terms of where the economy is heading at. I think just to encourage everyone, use the chat facilities. Our panelists are also answering the questions on the chat facility. But I'd like us just to zoom into this question from Siyabonga Tembe. And Jonathan, the question really is for you as well. And I think it's very topical, specifically for small business during this time. He says, with employers scaling down their workforce, remaining employers are asked to take on more and working longer hours with no increase in pay due to the economic retraction. How does one keep employee morale up when you can't reward them with can't reward them for working harder for you?
Shall I take that?
Yes, please, Jonathan.
Yeah, I can't restart the video, unfortunately, but you can hear me. It is a challenge. It can go either way. I mean, people can be given more work to do, or they can find themselves kicking the heels with less work to do, which is also demoralizing. And it sounds a bit trite, to say that money is not the big motivator, but that is to a large extent true. In the sense that people respond to a vision, to meaning, and to dignity in their contribution. And so the point about communication is really critical. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Take people into your confidence. Explain where the business is. Explain what has to happen. Give them a picture of the road forward as far as you know it, and ask them to contribute to planning that road even. And then when the demand comes that they have to work sort of 14 hours a day, whatever it might be, they will do it because they understand why it is there. What you can do also is make sure you don't overload them. And so the ideal situation is when the employee is pushing hard and the boss is saying, whoa, don't kill yourself. And that way, I think they're pushing from the correct sides. You can also, of course, reward them in non-material ways by additional days leave when the pressure is off, by letting them know how much they're valued and affirm them in the team meetings. And you can say, well, I can't reward you now, but when we've turned the corner, I'm going to be looking at a bigger bonus. You could, if you are brave and have lawyers on your side, go for employee share option schemes in some so that they share an upside of the company in due course. But that is quite a complex field for a small business.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of SMEs are trying to balance that out. And, it's a great segue into our next speaker, Xavier, where we're going to be speaking about some of the psychological and mental wellness and general wellness items, from an employee perspective. It's such a catch-22 because a lot of employees are, anxious and distressed around, maybe you're looking around and some friends, family are losing jobs, salary cuts, etc. But at the same time, perhaps there is this additional load in the workplace because of how things have had to be adjusted. So Xavier, maybe just having a look at from both the side of the entrepreneur in terms of the pressure that they have on their shoulders to keep those doors open and to keep those salaries clocking in, and from the side of the team. And how those dynamics are managed. What are you seeing? What are some of the questions that you are finding sitting on your couch? Always that like just those very comfortable couches. But if you're speaking to entrepreneurs, what are the questions being asked? And when you're speaking to employees, what are they presenting to you as some of the challenges, and how are you helping them navigate through that from a wellness perspective?
Thank you so much, Tebogo, and thank you to the previous speakers. I promise to keep it short this time, Sean, so you don't have to cut me like last time a year ago. And wow, it's been an incredible year of growth, a year that's no amount of strategic foresight could have prepared us for. But that doesn't mean that strategic foresight cannot orientate us and align us to ride the wave of growth a lot better going forward, taking the lessons from what we've learned. From a psychological point of view, I think some of the predictions that were made in the beginning already, speaking to what Phumlani has mentioned in the past, is that South Africa was already in a very difficult space from an economic point of view, but also from a mental health point of view. So some of the statistics that were predicted that by the end of 2020, depression would be one of the leading causes of people accessing medical aid services definitely came to light, and actually blew from being one of the leading causes to being the leading cause for people accessing. And not necessarily full on depression, but because depression is usually associated with a sense of hopelessness, a sense of burnout where there's no energy. And a lot of the time we've been able to get that little bit of energy that we need to push through to get through to develop resilience. to have an outcome of resilience. So it's not necessarily been a state of depression, but it's been a state coined by Professor Corey Keyes in the United States, a sociologist, as languishing. So I know a lot of us, we know the word anguish, which is very acute, very short-term stress. Your amygdala is firing up, you are in a state of fight, flight. And this is also relevant to what you were saying in the beginning, Tebogo, where we were predicting that there might be a bit of disengagement, a bit of demotivation when people were moving away from in-office work to the virtual space and to working remotely. So obviously when the crisis hit and when the pandemic hit, we were all in this massive state of fight or flight, and a lot of us were in a state of fight. So that contributed to a lot of engagement, a lot of motivation, a lot of ideas springing up, new businesses springing up, new ideas of growth, and how to mobilize your business within a space of a week to go from in-person type of contact to completely virtual contact. It was incredible to see how people were able to negotiate that in a very creative and innovative way. Obviously, the demand of being in that space of flights is excessive. So being in an optimal state of stress, where stress is motivating and stress is engaging, yes, you are able to push through. Yes, you're able to work the 14, 15-hour days. But how long can you sustain that? And that's what we found, is that especially in the mental health space and employee wellness, is that for the first, even the first 3 months of lockdown, or even the first 3-5 weeks, the first 3 months of lockdown, the mental health profession was almost at a low point. There were so few practicing psychologists that were actually busy. Medical doctors were actually having difficulty making ends meet because people weren't coming to them with their normal ailments. So it was a very difficult time for the healthcare space, especially the private healthcare space. But what we found is after 3 months, which was around about the time that we can sustain that level of high levels of stress, people started experiencing exhaustion. And that's that sense of languishing, which is this continuation, this demand, and it's just this very little left to give. And a lot of us are feeling that today. And I know that you spoke in the beginning, Tebogo, about needing to bring some optimism in. And I know that you say that you're a pessimist, but I do think that that it's important to be realistic. So we have been seeing these waves of coming in and out of mental health issues, new states of optimism coming in, especially in the beginning of the year. I don't know if you recall, in Gauteng, there was about 3 weeks of complete rain. And when the sun started shining again, I started hearing these narratives coming out of hope and motivation and optimism. And then bam, 2 weeks later, we're back to a state of how do we cope? How do we maintain? How do we sustain this level? So it is important from a building or sustaining our capacity for coping to really continue looking at self-care as one of the most important aspects, whether you are the employer or the employee. Self-care is one of the most important aspects. You cannot be the best employee, best employer, best anything until you are the best you. So going back to some of the things that lead us to being the best you is really about, I don't know if any of you have toddlers at home, but if a toddler wants your attention, it's going to get your attention. Even if you're having an adult conversation with your partner or with a business partner, you've all experienced that on Zoom and MS Teams. Your children coming in most inopportune moments to get your attention, and ignoring them doesn't work because they just get louder and louder and louder, and they'll walk through that door more and more often. And emotions are very much similar. So one way to keep and to regulate and to control your toddlers is to give them the attention that they need. So really being able to identify, to be able to accept, and to be able to regulate your emotions is so important. But that comes with a level of awareness, a level of consciousness, a level of self-awareness that we cannot ignore. So ignoring of our emotions is something that is extremely dangerous because it will catch up to us at some point in time. Other avenues that are extremely important that have been that have been really paramount, dominant discourse in the psychological field is the importance of emotional expression. And that doesn't necessarily mean in psychotherapy with a therapist or in pastoral counseling with a pastor or any form of therapy, but some form of some form of emotional expression. It could be dance, it could be music, it could be anything where your passion that is preferably not linked to an occupational identity can really help rejuvenate your energy levels to give that extra the next day. So to continue with that demand. Practicing mindfulness, I'm sure a lot of you have heard mindfulness every single day, new apps popping up with mindfulness techniques and things like that. So extremely important, yes. I mentioned it previously that a lot of the time we are not present. We're not present with ourselves. We're not present with the people around us. So mindfulness really is that practice of being here, being aware of where you are in relation to life, in relation to the desk in front of you, in relation to your partner. The 3 pillars, and I know Jonathan mentioned some of them earlier in terms of what contributes to resilience. The 3 pillars of physical wellness, which is so clearly linked to psychological wellness, are again your sleep, your nutrition, and your exercise, and those are extremely important and have been important. Unfortunately, when it comes to sleep, a lot of us have lost that boundary, lost the physical boundaries of actually waking up, preparing yourself to get to work, getting in your car, sitting in traffic, getting through that psychological boundary and preparation to move into the workspace. Now you wake up 20 minutes before you need to log in, or a little bit before the meeting. You go from your bedroom into the next room, which is your office. So there's very little time to actually prepare yourself psychologically for that need to be present. So what's happened there, because of the lack of physical boundaries, there's been a lot more exhaustion because we don't know when to stop, especially people that don't have partners or young children that will force you to move away from your desk. You would find yourself working into the wee hours of the morning without anybody saying, well, take it easy. And you're the only one who's going to suffer from a sleep hygiene point of view. So sleep hygiene, extremely important. Exercise has always been extremely important, but nutrition as well. We are biological beings. What you ingest is what you are able to give out. So, it's yeah. Sorry.
No, absolutely. I agree. And I think that last point around, if you are kind of, you don't have a partner or somebody to force you, a child or something like that. I think in this time, personally, I've been very grateful to have a young child who really isn't interested in what to do work. And when it's her time, it's her time. I put you on the spot. You mentioned in the beginning that those first 3 months were very slow, actually. And then it was almost like that fight or flight, that adrenaline kind of weaned off after the 3 months, and people needed to then come into spaces to get help. But we also know that in South Africa, particularly, mental health can be something that has a pretty high price tag. It's not every entrepreneur that has got mental wellness kind of facilities for their employees in the business, etc. And right now, as Nomathemba was saying, there's so much online that people can tap into that kind of that balance out, maybe not going to see a psychologist weekly, but maybe once a month, and then in between doing something yourself. Can you maybe direct us somewhere online? Just quickly, maybe what kind of content do you consume, where you can just drop us a few pages or Instagram pages or just anything really. Podcasts are really great that you would recommend that maybe when people log off right now can just check those out and share with their teams as well, just over and above maybe tapping into professional help if needed.
Absolutely. So I do think that Google has become an even bigger resource than what it was previously, and in addition to that, YouTube. So there are so many free YouTube channels where they provide yoga classes, which you can share. So yoga, in terms of its mindfulness and in terms of its meditation and physicality, is something that's so important, and many leading psychologists and mental health and employee health experts will promote the use of yoga. And even if it's just within your intranet site or within some form of email body, just sharing a link of a new yoga class or mindfulness class. Some things that are extremely important that people have been using are TEDx talks, which are always extremely motivational, usually 10 to 12 minutes, that can really get people thinking critically about their space, their positioning, their attitude towards the future. A lot of the time you would have the employer with this massive amount of pressure in terms of motivating, where at the end of the day, there needs to be some level of accountability taken from employees as well, from a self-directed and positioning towards the challenge that lies ahead. So a lot of the time we sit back and we wait for this tunnel, or the light at the end of the tunnel. And what this year has taught us is that light is, it might not come. So instead of waiting passively, how can we start punching holes in our tunnel to create light within our tunnel, so that we're not necessarily waiting passively, but we're waiting, we being active, proactive, and taking accountability. So there are a lot of mindfulness links, and just off the top of my head, some of the apps that are available are Stop, Breathe, and Think. It's an excellent app to self-audit every single morning, to just check in, these are the dominant emotions, these are the dominant feelings that I have, and it creates a mindfulness practice, which is, sometimes 6 to 10 minutes to take you through that. And it's really just a quick 20 minutes practice that intentionally you can put in your day that centers your day around you. So Stop, Breathe, Think. There's also Calm. So there are so many, and I'll definitely put that in the chats and email you as also to share to all the attendees and whoever is interested afterwards.
Awesome.
Then so I think that there are so many. It would be difficult to mention all of them, but I'll definitely share some with you after.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Xavier. That's brilliant. I think sometimes it's so important not to log on to Instagram when you open your eyes. So something that can really help you just to purge a little bit first thing in the morning, what you're feeling, and make sure that you are going into your day refreshed. Karine has found she's shared a link to something that she uses. I think it's a yoga class link. Thank you so much. Sean, if there's no questions from you, I'm going to move on quickly to Kagiso, who's going to take us through a little bit of his reflection in terms of investments and saving. Like I said in the intro, at the beginning of lockdown, it was, people really were, some people were between a rock and a hard place in terms of, should I cash some of my investments in? Should I tap into those funds that I have in my savings that were for a rainy day? How long is this going to last? How far should I make my money stretch? So Kagiso, welcome to you, and maybe you can just take us through your reflections of what Gradish Mahura and maybe you and also your personal encounters with some clients. What did you guys notice in terms of how people were using their savings or not using them? But what is your perspective and your reflection on the year that has passed?
Hi, Tebogo. I suppose I can keep my video off, or would you like me to put it on? Or
if you could kindly put it on, thank you.
No, you switched me off, ma'am. It was you.
Oh, okay. My apologies. We'll sort that out, guys, if you don't mind.
I know you don't like looking at my face, but I didn't know it was that bad. Didn't know.
You can continue. Bradley will fix it.
All right, fantastic. Good evening to you, Tebogo. Good evening to all the participants and the panelists that are here today. So it's been a very interesting 12 months, so to speak, So, when we spoke last year, we always try to look at the entrepreneur from two perspectives. One as a professional in themselves, and then secondly as a business owner. So the advice that we were giving around savings and investments was kind of twofold. So the first thing we talked about was not to panic, because whenever we're in an economic crisis or investment crisis, the first thing that people do is actually that they panic. And the reason we were saying this is that we've seen so many crises before. So I'm going to give you two statistics very quickly as a part of the reflection of what happened over the last year. The first one is we had this seminar or this webinar on the 26th of April. I remember it was hours before lockdown, and some of us had to rush to go pick up kids and all sorts of stuff to be home by 8 o'clock. So I've looked at the return on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange between the 26th of April. So had you actually invested in the stock exchange on the 26th of March last year until yesterday, you would have made a 56% return on the market over the last year. You would have made 56% return on your money had you invested at the beginning of this crisis that we had last year. So this is always the first thing we say to our clients. When everybody else is panicking, when it comes to savings and investments, the one that holds the mind, the one that keeps the cool, is often the one that makes the money when it comes to savings and investments. So that was the first message we were giving to our clients. The second one we're saying, please remember that COVID-19 it's a very interesting combination. In the past, let's say in 2008, we had an economic crisis with the credit crunch. When the AIDS and HIV pandemic started, that was a health crisis that we had in the 80s and the 90s. But with COVID-19, it was very interesting because it's a combination of both an economic and a health crisis at the same time. So when clients were coming to us, they're saying, we are being retrenched, we have to retrench some of our staff, etc. What do we do? Can we stop our insurances? Can we stop our savings? Where do we start prioritizing? We were very clear when we spoke to our entrepreneurs to say, both for yourselves and for your employees, the first thing you do, which is really counterintuitive, is to leave your insurances in place because we have an economic crisis. You've spent a lot of your money paying for medical aids. You've been paying for life insurances and disability covers and all of that. And now at the point where you need them the most, you want to actually cut off those premiums because now you're in a crisis. You're going to get sick and people are going to pass away. Those are the things that you must be keeping. And we were quite satisfied to see that a lot of our entrepreneurs, both as professionals, and I'll give you a couple of stats a little bit later, and as employees. So what happened is those that were employees, when they had to cut down on spending, because what happens in employee benefits is that you have the savings component, which is the retirement side or the pension or provident fund, but you also have the risk side, which pays for your funeral and life insurance and disability. Is that what they did when we were engaging with them, is that they reduced a little bit on the saving side, but they left their risk cover that they were contributing for their employees, so that if anybody got sick, if anybody passed away during the economic crisis, at least they would get the risk benefits coming through. But on the saving side, what they did very well is that although they reduced the savings that they were making into those pension and provident funds, they did not panic. They left the pension and provident funds invested. And therefore, when this 56% return that I'm talking about happened, they benefited from that return in this particular time that we're actually sitting in. So it was a very interesting time that we moved into. So even if you had invested in government bonds, you made a 24.8% return just investing in what we call the All Bond Index within the country. So when we look back over the years, over the last year, and we look at entrepreneurs or the professionals that we deal with, a lot of them did incredibly well by leaving their life insurances and stuff in place. Because for the first time, people were booked off, not because they were sick, but because they were in contact with somebody that had COVID. Are you with me? So a lot of our entrepreneurs then losing out on income because now suddenly they couldn't go to work because now they had been in contact with somebody. And a lot of our insurance companies actually paid them for loss of income, for not being able to go to work, although they were not disabled, they were not sick, or in fact, there was no health issue that they'd been diagnosed with over that period. So the advice that we'd actually given them to say, keep your insurances in place, that although they couldn't work, but at least they could claim from their life insurances while they left their savings intact at that point in time. So the last year, just in summary, because I know we run out of time, we're already on 10:07 now, is that the last year, for those who kept their cool and stayed invested in the market, they saw the return. Those who did not panic, they saw the return coming through. Those that kept their life insurances in place, they saw the benefits actually coming through. And now, as the businesses are starting to recover, and a lot of our small businesses are starting to recover, they're getting back into the markets, they're rehiring some of the staff that they had to lay off over the last year. They're starting to get back into the market as well. So to me, the lesson going forward is when we hit another crisis in the future, do not panic when everybody else is panicking. That's my 2 cents worth. Tebogo, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to touch on. I'm quite cognizant. You gave me the short end of the stick last time, and so you did it again.
I'm sorry. Next time you'll go first. At 56%. I mean, I don't know, Sean. Did you invest?
So it's definitely a silver lining in terms of the crisis, and whoever did invest, as the saying goes, they put a crisis to good work. I think that one of the key things that we saw as well, and it would be interesting to hear some of the feedback from the people on the chat as well, is what decisions did you make? I think one of the key fundamentals that we decided on early on during lockdown was to give this education to entrepreneurs. So we partnered up with Gradish Maura in order to provide a masterclass here. So I want to refer some of the listeners to our Entrepreneurship to the Point website in order for you to go and view and sign up for the online masterclass, or at least view some of the sessions that we had, because it's about being able to educate entrepreneurs during tough times, or at least education provides an upside when you are going through tough times. So I think Kagiso, definitely a good silver lining for me. And being able to stick to the basics, keep the insurance in place when you're going through a crisis. Don't cancel your policies. Make sure that those things are in place, because it does pay off. So yeah, great advice.
Sean, if I can just add, I think to me the greatest lesson is, besides not panicking and keeping calm, is that you must always try and balance things out. Because what tends to happen when we're in a crisis is people try and do extreme things. They want to stop all of this or stop all of that, or start this or start that. And the idea often is everything that you're doing, you just moderate it. Are you with me? You don't go into panic mode and say, I'm canceling this completely, or I'm starting this new thing that's completely new. But it is rather to take a step back, look at this thing as soberly as you possibly can as a business, to say, instead of saying, I'm going to retrench all these people and get rid of them because my overheads are high. You often have to just take one step back and say, maybe if we just stay calm for another month or two and see what's happening, then you make a lot more rational decisions. So our biggest crisis was actually in our heads more than actually happening outside in the environment that we were. It is the ones that were panicking and thinking that this is the end of the world. From a savings perspective, from a business perspective, I'm going to lose all my clients, I'm going to lose all my staff. Those are the people that made the drastic decisions and therefore had much further to recover from than those that took very conscious, sober decisions step by step, and making sure that we don't make too many drastic decisions at the same time.
That's a great reflection. I think it's taking those sober decisions, because I think one of the other things that you mentioned, Kagiso, is the fact that we've gone through a few crises before in our lifetimes. It's how do we navigate that? And I think coming back to some of the practical aspects, T, we're going to be looking now at really cash flow management and just financial management. And I want to just go to one of the questions in the chat as well. So as Nkateko comes on board, just for her to reflect on this question. Siyabonga says here, how do small businesses needing a cash injection, perhaps from a business loan, and who have little by way of collateral, take advantage of the lower interest rate? So maybe just reflecting on the access to finance during this time, specifically in the context of lower interest rate as well, would be a great reflection, Nkateko. Over to you, T.
Thanks so much, Sean. And thank you so much, Kagisho. I see a comment, somebody saying, I burnt the boats. I don't know what that means. I hope it means that they did the right thing in March. But Nkateko, I'm going to hand over to you just to maybe first just reflect on that question from Siyabonga, and then just take us through what you saw as somebody who works very closely with businesses, helping them truly inside their businesses. I mean, I think you had access to seeing, details of exactly the choices that these businesses were having to make in terms of how they are spending their money and trying to keep that cash flowing and trying to redeem the cash that was due to them. So over to you, Nkem.
Thank you, Tebogo, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's really great to be back. We have indeed made it to the other side, sweat, tears, and all, but we made it. I think reflecting on Siyabonga's question, T, I think it's key to really understand what products are out there for small businesses. And then from there, you sort of then take it the next level to then say, what is my financial requirement? And then from there, you'll then be able to match yourself with the funder that really, firstly, their mandate is aligned to what your requirements are. And also in terms of their pricing, you'd be able to benefit from that. I hope that does answer Siyabonga's question. And really going then into my reflections for the past year, in the webinar last year, I spoke under 6 points when it comes to managing the cash flow of a business during uncertain times. And let's do a bit of a recap on those points before we get into how far off or close to reality things unfolded during the past year. I think the first element was around understanding and monitoring your cash flow, following up on outstanding invoices, cutting down on non-essential expenses, reaching out to creditors to negotiate payment terms, exploring relief options and facilities available for SMMEs, as well as communicating with your customers, with your creditors and your employees. Let's then unpack how the above assisted, if at all. I think businesses which were able to understand their cash flow in a better position to make decisions which really helped them better manage the effects of the pandemic on their businesses. Some of those decisions included, but were not limited to, aligning their focus to services which were still essential even during the hard lockdown, and prioritizing those services in an effort to improve their inflow of money to the business, as well as understanding the financial requirements and seeking external finance to keep the businesses going. On the second aspect around following up on outstanding invoices, this really proved to be a bit of a challenge because everyone was trying to manage their cash flow during uncertain times. So some outstanding invoices were paid out and others were delayed, which really had a negative impact on the cash flow of the businesses. This also meant that certain projects had to be put on hold due to the lack of financial resources to execute on the projects, which in turn meant that there are less invoices being issued, which in turn meant that there's less money flowing into the businesses. Around the third element of cutting down on non-essential expenses, businesses were able to cut down on those expenses. And I think the pandemic also provided an opportunity to innovate around new ways of working and collaborating within teams working remotely. The fourth element was around reaching out to creditors to negotiate payment terms. Some of those who actually did reach out were able to structure more affordable repayment terms, and those who didn't, unfortunately, lost some of their assets and their credit record has since been negatively impacted. The fifth one was around exploring relief options and facilities available for SMMEs. This proved to be quite a hot topic. In the opening remarks last year, I alluded to the poor financial record keeping and financial management characteristics, which are really inherent in some SMMEs. And according to the FinFund report on the impact of COVID-19 on SMMEs, nearly 70% of the businesses they surveyed do their financial record keeping in-house. And yet only 28%, let me repeat that, 28% had up-to-date management accounts. And when it comes to accessing the relief funds, what we found was that the businesses which stood a better chance were those who could demonstrate a level of financial record keeping, which enabled the funders to assess the financial performance as well as the track record of the business. And those who were able to better articulate their funding requirements, which also showed a level of understanding of the current financial status of the business, and to some extent, a projection of what would be required for the next couple of months linked to the pipeline of projects. And also, I think the key thing is always around compliance, which could be compliance with industry-specified requirements. And some businesses on the program were able to access the relief funds, ranging from the NYDA funding, the UIF temporary employer relief scheme, the SMME relief funds, Oppenheimer, and some were also able to access some overdrafts with their respective banks. And not to say that the management and disbursements of these funds are not a challenge, but that's really a topic for another day. I think then the last element was around communicating and really communicating with your customers, with your creditors and debtors, as well as your employees. And we found that communicating with customers and understanding their needs at that particular point led to businesses really tweaking their service offerings to be able to service the immediate needs of the clients. You found that services such as the supply of PPE, sanitizers, fogging and disinfecting, partitioning of hospital wards were providing new revenue streams for the businesses. And also found that communicating with creditors and debtors really provided an opportunity to negotiate payment terms. The last part was around communicating with employees. I think Jonathan touched a bit on this, and this really provided an opportunity to explore options to really improve job security, especially because there was just a lot of uncertainty. People were being laid off, salaries were being cut. So though unfortunately some had to ultimately retrench, other favorable arrangements were reached, such as reduced salaries until the financial status of the businesses improves. And in conclusion, we are seeing a slight improvement in the financial performance of some of the businesses. And even though some had to unfortunately close down, there are certainly lessons to be learned on how to diversify existing business interests, as well as build and run sustainable and a bit more resilient businesses. Over to you, T.
Thank you, Nkateko. Always so succinct and always to the point. I think what you covered was almost a nice summary of just, you spoke about cash flow, but a lot of those elements we did speak about before, communicating with your employees, making sure that you can redeem your cash from people that you have serviced, so that reputation element definitely comes into play. So thank you so much for that reflection, NK. I can't see any questions that are popping up from there, but if they do come up, please do put them in the chat. Nkateko is still here and she can definitely engage with us in the chat. The last panelist that we're going to speak to is Celeste Leroux. She is one of the directors and co-founders of React 24, and she's an entrepreneur. And her kind of being on this panel is really to give us an on-the-ground perspective of somebody. We have been talking about what should entrepreneurs do psychologically, leadership, cash flow, savings, what, but now we're talking to somebody who can tell us, okay, great, all of the theory and the concepts are really great. What actually transpired? And I know, Celeste, that you and your team had some really great wins in this period. But we did also speak about, some of the perceptions that were out there in the market regarding SMEs and how prepared they were to apply for certain relief funds, or how geared they were, and kind of the narratives that were swirling around. So maybe you can just give the audience just a little bit of background around React 24, and how was this period for you. You can maybe start with some of the challenges, and then some of the wins that you had, and then some of those maybe narratives that you were also looking to address.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tebogo, and good evening to all the panelists and everybody out there listening. My name is Celeste Leroux. I'm the CEO of React 24. We're a site services company, and we render all built environment rates to facilities management companies, insurances, and those include plumbing, electrical, carpentry, but we also just offer them all under one roof. So we're sort of a one-stop shop, and you come to us and we offer you a turnkey solution. So I liked all the insights that everybody had given. Although I'd like to just go back before the pandemic, and let's just look at the environment within which entrepreneurs and SMMEs already were working. So the economy was sluggish, high crime, sometimes challenging to obtain access to funding and information. I'm sure those that have registered a business just knows all the red tape that goes into just registering a business. So the bureaucratic red tape is sometimes a nightmare. And then you also have to deal with limited skills. So that was before the pandemic. And now the pandemic hits, and now what? Everybody's in a panic. As a leader, you have to assure your staff that you're going to give them the correct information as you receive it. There was a lot of misinformation, a lot of educating our staff in particular around the pandemic, what we were supposed to do, precautions, etc. So that was a lot to contend with. And now during the pandemic, even when the pandemic started, you had the relief funds, so you could make use of the UIF TERS, Sakuma Fund, and so forth. And then there was this amazing initiative that I didn't quite understand, but it was called #PayIn30. And so my question would be, why aren't you paying your suppliers in 30 days? Especially your SMMEs. That to me was, like, what's up with that? And it was in the newspaper, and it's on the internet, and it was a big boo-ha about it. And I think to SMMEs, it would have been, if you could pay me within 7 days, 48 hours would be great, but if you could just pay me within 7 days, that would be wonderful. So definitely, we had to watch our cash flow. Because cash is king, you sort of have to pay attention to that. So that was what we were going through at the time. But now during COVID, we're experiencing something quite bizarre. And I think it's around perception, and we touched on it yesterday. And I must tell you, I left that panel feeling so dejected. I felt so low because I thought we had come so far. And there's this narrative that SMMEs were not well prepared for this pandemic. That might be true, but that's true for most businesses, big or small. And then also there's this narrative around procurement that they need to now spend with people that are bigger than the SMMEs, because now SMMEs cannot deliver. And we need to change that narrative immediately. I look at our business alone. We were able to pivot. And so we went into fogging. We could sustain ourselves. In fact, we did good during the pandemic. And it's so strange because it was the first time that I met Jonathan this evening. We did scenario planning as a small business. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the skill or intelligence of small businesses. I'm not sure what that is about, but we need to get through that. Anyway, I think looking forward, what we do need to do as entrepreneurs, I think we need to take advantage of technology, leverage that technology to gain new clients, expand your bouquet of services maybe. And so that needs to be looked at. Strategies also need to, I think as entrepreneurs, you're so operationally busy within the business that you don't always take a step back and have an overall view of your business, which is very important. And then, as I said, scenario planning is important. What are you going to do during the good times? How's your business going to be? And even if there's a bad time, like we've experienced in COVID, and how are you going to adapt your business to sort of navigate through those environments? When it's good, you need to look at building capacity, and when it's bad, you need to make a way. So I think what helped us as well was employing lean thinking throughout the entire business. It was a good stance for us to take and say, let's look at our processes. How efficient are we within the business? And let's see how lean we can become. And that's throughout the entire organization. And I think the most important thing was your relationships with your clients. I firmly believe that people do business with people and people that they trust. So having garnered a relationship for quite a few number of years, put us in the best stead for our clients to come back to us. And so your relationships with your clients, how they trust you is important. And I think those are the businesses that even after COVID, they're going to survive and thrive because their clients will remember that they helped them out during COVID. So also, like I mentioned earlier, cash flow, collect all your monies, keep an eye on your debtors. It's extremely important. Sit on that every day. So I think that's about it from me. If there are any questions, we can discuss that. So I hope I wasn't too pessimistic, but that was just the reality.
Maybe T, just to kind of lean into, I was giving myself a little bit of a chuckle when you mentioned a few things, specifically around, I think it was a bit cheeky from corporate South Africa, the whole pay in 30, because we had some really big blue chip companies there that was endorsing the campaign. And I do think that we should move beyond the fact that, you know, we should be stretching small businesses cash flow in order to keep our own kind of corporate cash flow intact and not paying in time. And I think that it would have been more topical if they had gone, you know, hashtag pay in 7 days type of thing.
Absolutely.
In order to really provide the support. But I also think just Celeste, how have from a kind of corporate leadership perspective, how have you guys just changed as leaders or stepped up or changed organizationally changed? I think is one of the questions I have. Just because we've seen your journey, we've seen React 24's journey, and definitely it's been a year of I think personal growth and also leadership growth. But maybe just your own reflection on it.
Yes, Sean, it's been such a phenomenal year that sometimes I look back and I feel guilty because, you know, it's COVID and we're in the pandemic. But then I realized that we've worked really, really hard, you know, to sort of get where we are. And I think for David and myself, our main objective and our goal is always to make sure that those that are employed by us, you know, they have food on the table at the end of the day. And that responsibility we do not take lightly. It's a huge responsibility that I know it's not always good, but it still keeps you up at 3 o'clock in the morning to make sure that you are sustainable. So there's been a big shift towards the human element, considering people, even putting more emphasis on our culture as an organization. And the most amazing thing about the pandemic was it sort of brought us closer together. And so that was a good thing to see, you know, our team coming together and saying, you know what, we're going to go through this. And even when it was a question of, guys, we're either going to take salary reductions or we're going to have to let some people go. And it was unanimous. Everybody was prepared to take salary deductions instead of letting their team members go. And that to me was phenomenal. It meant that we were doing something right and that we were headed in the right direction. But certainly being empathetic towards your employees, that's a huge thing, as well as collaboration. We didn't expect, the ideas and the input that our employees had, which was amazing. And we still use it today within our processes and things like that. So collaborating with employees, there's something to be said for that.
Awesome. Yeah,
Thank you so much, Celeste. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry,
Sean. Thank you.
No,
thank you so much.
Was freezing up there for a minute.
But okay.
As we close.
Yeah, it is 7:30, and I think that was a great way to wrap it up. I think that was such a good point. And, Celeste kind of glided past it there to say, sometimes there's a little bit of underestimating, we always, the whole hype around entrepreneurs is because they are these agile, creative, problem-solving beings that a lot of people look up to and aspire to be like. And I think that perhaps the narrative could have given a little bit more credit to the entrepreneurs that were able to pivot and the entrepreneurs that were able to do new things and introduce various ways to continue to keep their doors open and to keep people employed. So thank you so much, Celeste, and thank you so much to our entire panel this evening. This was a great conversation and a great reflection. I think it was a great way to just wrap up that season and to now go forth in a new energy with an excitement. We understand what to do. We know, if you're sitting next to somebody, keep the distance, wear the mask, etc. And now I think we can focus on getting to work and on doing what we love and on continuing to grow our business. Thank you so much to everybody. I'm going to ask Bradley to put up the slide. If you guys missed our session last month, please do go to our YouTube page. We had Joey Kuvutlu on the line and he was being interviewed by Bradley. It was an incredible session around getting to know your customer. Joey is the CEO of one of the largest advertising agencies in our country. And the insights that he shared in terms of how they serve their really major clients and how SMEs can adapt that to their small businesses and their clients. And he gave a lot of tips and tools to either free or very, very affordable online tools that SMEs can use to ensure that they do the right customer research and that they get to know their clients, access to markets and access to funding. That is the bread and butter of business. And that is why we are doing the Back to Basics series. So if you look on the next slide, if you go and visit us at ettp.co.za, we already have events April, May, June, I think July is also up there. We are covering all of the topics that we believe are the fundamentals to keep us going and get that momentum running in order for us to continue with our businesses or to start the new ventures that some of us might need to. So next week, Thursday, we are looking at access to funding. That event is already up and you can start to register. And within the next few days, we will be announcing who that panel will be. And you can join us to really just talk about, number one, I think we're definitely going to cover, we've called the session Dance with Your Funder Again. And we're going to cover some of the issues that will enable you to have those conversations and to really stand out when it comes to talking to your funders about accessing some of the funding that they have. But also we will be bringing on board various people to help us understand what do they have to offer, what is the criteria, how do you qualify, etc. So please do go to ettp.co.za and check out which sessions are of interest to you. And on there, you will also be able to go to our resources tab, which you can see on there, and you'll be able to access all of our past content as well via our YouTube platform. Sean, that's all from me this evening. If there's nothing else, then we can say good night.
Yes, definitely. Good night once again, guys. Thanks for joining us to an excellent panel once again as a reflection. And in the words of Jonathan in the chat, we have all survived the year. So well done, and all the best to the businesses out there. Cheers, guys.